Welcome, welcome. Tonight we are so excited to welcome David Crabb. I'm going to run through his bio really quickly. We'll make it painless. David Crabb is a 1999 graduate of the Academy's Photography Department and is currently a Los Angeles-based author, performer, storyteller, and host of The Moth. In 2013, his solo show, Bad Kid, was named a New York Times Critic's Pick. Bad Kid, the memoir, was released in 2015 by Harper Perennial. David has taught storytelling at Upright Citizens Brigade Theatre, Occidental College, Indiana University, and NYU. Since 2012, he has performed the solo pieces Bad Kid, $1,800, Story Roulette, and Man in a Hole. David is the host of the podcast Stories in Session. His next memoir comes out in 2019, and he is currently a professor of autobiographical performance at Occidental College. Please welcome David Crabb.
Thank you. You're so soft. I just want to touch you for a very long time. Sam is so soft. I just want to keep touching him in that sweater. That was a weird way to start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. I mainly came to win the Mercedes. That's the main thing. I saw that sandwich board today outside of a few departments, and I was like, ooh, I wonder if this is leading me to like an impromptu musical performance with, no, it's just a free car, which was, and then I thought, wait, is it art? Like maybe there's not, because I get confused when I come here. I arrived last night, and I was walking up through the dorm, and on the stairs were several pairs of black men's underwear just scattered up the stairs. And I thought, oh, well, someone was doing their laundry. This is unfortunate. And then I thought, but what if it's art? Because it's very confusing. And then I think they were just underwear. I didn't touch them. So when I came here in 1997, I had a lot of ideas about art that I wanted to make. I was going to school in Southwest Texas State University. And I decided that after I graduated, I would move into my parents' garage in San Antonio. My stepdad was making me a dark room in there. I was really, really psyched about it until I actually moved into the garage and wanted to die. I thought, I cannot live in this windowless garage. What am I doing staying in San Antonio, Texas? I've complained my whole life about getting out of Texas. Why have I signed this deal with the devil? And luckily, I called my undergrad professor, and he knew that I was stressed, and he's like, do you want to move to Michigan in like a month and a half? There's one spot open in the photo department, and if the professor likes your work, you could go. And I was like, yes! Like I've never been so urgently yes. And I sent my work, and I met with Carl Toth, who ran the photography department. And we had a wonderful meeting, and I moved here. Now, when I moved here, I had taken a summer course in undergrad. So like I had none of that like adult time that most of you probably take between like college and grad school. I realized immediately when I got here, we did photo day where they look at everyone's birthdays. And I realized, and everyone knew that I was the second youngest person at the whole school out of like 140 students. A fact that the actual youngest person, Scooby Lepowski, made sure everyone knew to deflect away from him being the actual baby. And I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew the work I wanted to make. And immediately Cranbrook did the thing that it does when you get here. They tell you to stop what you're doing and change. Everyone, I was like, well, you should go make fibers. Why aren't you performing? And I was like, I thought you liked my photos. I was so confused. I was a petrified mess. I remember one day in the hallway of the dorm, I called my daddy on the phone, and I was like, this is too much. I don't know what to do. I'm like almost the baby of everyone in this school. And I thought I was in total privacy, not realizing there's transom windows over all the doors that were open. So I was like sobbing openly. I mean, in the next 2 years that would be really wonderful and healthy and fun, all of the students who were there that night would be like, yeah, we heard you. You were having a rough time that night on the phone with your papa. But I got into it, and I started to really, really enjoy Cranbrook and really enjoy not doing photography. I discovered pretty quickly that there was a lot of performance I wanted to do. I realized that I wanted to make narrative art and video. And one of my favorite memories of Cranbrook ever was my second year review. Sitting, in my little photo studio, and I was surrounded by my work, just waiting anxiously, diuretically on a stool for peers and teachers to come and critique me. And I was sitting there, and Heather McGill came in. And I've always loved Heather McGill. How many of you, Heather McGill left last year, year before? So second years know Heather McGill? You met her. I met her. She's a vapor. She was the head of the sculpture department, and she was, if you've ever met Heather, she's very steely gaze. She knows what she wants, and like I was excited to get her, but terrified. And she came into my studio, and she looked at my work. Now, by that point, it was my second year, and my work basically mocked art. It was like a video of a cube of ice melting with an overdub of me telling the viewer all the amazing things they could be doing if they were outside, besides watching this ice cube melt. Another piece was an audio piece, and it was a very highfalutin, deeply intellectual lecture by a guest artist, but it was the conversation of two people at the back of the auditorium who were mic'd, who were making fun of the speaker. And Heather looked at all the work, and she said, wow, this is great. She laughed. I was like, oh, this is going good. And then she said, no, I mean, it's great. So what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to move to New York, and you know, I'm going to get a job in a gallery, and I'm going to like show my work. You know, I'm going to like be an artist. And she said, oh, that's great, yeah, but grow up. And I said, what do you, what does that mean? And she said, well, no, this is great. I know you want to move to New York. You're going to show your work and be in a gallery. I mean, I love it. It's great. It's so funny. Like, I get what you're going for, but grow up. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And before we could finish the conversation, the head of metals came in urgently because they have to see like 1,000 people. And he had to see my work. And Heather and I had to say goodbye, and she left. And I never got to figure out, like, what did grow up mean? And I would see her on Academy Way the next few days, and I'd pass her, and she'd look at me, and I knew that I could stop her and say, what did you mean by telling me to grow up when you looked at my art? But I didn't want to ask her because I was terrified about what the answer would be. In retrospect, as an adult, she was telling me to grow up because I was making art that did not function in the art space. I was making art that no one would want to put up in their gallery when it mocked art and told people to leave the space. And what she ended up talking to me about later on, she was like, what else are you going to do in New York? And I said, well, I want to look into improv. I'm obsessed with Upright Citizens Brigade and all these other things. So when I went to New York, I made one art piece before I sort of moved out of the field, and it was a video installation called 20 Men Doing It. I was very proud of it. It was basically me in a room enacting the gestures of 20 different men over and over again. Some of them were famous men like Tiger Woods, and some of them were just like guy outside of the whiz, just a guy getting like, sup, over and over again, right? And I was obsessed with gesture and performance, but I wasn't really connecting with it in a way that functioned in the art space. But very quickly what I did was I started taking improv classes and working with a theater company. The theater company I was a member of was called Axis Theater. It was deeply avant-garde theater. I was in a play about the atomic bomb, in which the atomic bomb was played by a giant mime in a top hat who would appear in the porthole of a boat and say, boom, like that. It was, I loved it. And then I started to do more straight acting, and I would go on auditions. I auditioned for Special Victims Unit probably about 15 times to be an assorted criminal or pervert. They really liked me there. I never got the part. And you know, when I moved to New York, I was also feeling like, kind of like Cranbrook, like I was finding myself, but I wasn't figuring out how I fit into the scheme of things. And I always remember this one Special Victims Unit audition I went in. I just started to go straight to callbacks. They didn't even audition me because like the producers liked me, even though they would never cast me. So I went in this guy's office, and the episode of Special Victims Unit was very traditional Law and Order arc. If you've ever seen the show, it's the same thing over and over again. There's basically like a woman who's been accosted or murdered, and they think it's this one guy because he has a computer. He's sort of like a sniveling jerk that lives in his mom's basement and has webcams everywhere. And you think he's the criminal the whole time until the last 10 minutes when he leads them to a billionaire CEO who's actually a murderous pervert, and that's the guy, right? Same structure again and again. And I was the Weasley pervert who lived in his mom's basement. I read with that guy for 30 minutes, and he was like, this is great, David. You're really, really good for this. And I was so excited. I'd been working on this in my kitchen with my husband in Brooklyn for like hours doing these sides. And then I didn't get the part. And I was like, well, it's cool. It's cool I didn't get the part, and I let it go. And about a month later, I was looking up TV listings or something, and I saw the listing on like Hulu or something online, and it was my episode. It was like, woman is murdered at an immersive art piece in New York, and da-da-da. And I was like, oh, that's the one I auditioned for. So I told my husband, come home, we're gonna watch this thing and see what happened. We're gonna watch the show and see who got the part. So we sit down and we start the episode, and it's just like the script, and it's so fun to see it. And then the actor playing my part, he's being questioned by Mariska Hargitay, and he's sitting there, and she's like, you know, what did you do tell us what you did. Did you kill her? And he says, and my husband and I are watching this like, is this for real? This guy is terrible. He slaps his own face. He beats himself. Mariska Hargitay, it looks like even the actress is looking at him like, oh, that's a lot of acting. And we watch the show and think, wow, what a terrible turn of events for this actor who will never have anything in his career again. His name is Adam Driver. That was that terrible actor's breakthrough, who proceeded to be amazing in everything and win all the awards. But that was like another moment where I thought, oh, I don't think I fit. I mean, how many times can a guy go and audition for Law & Order and be liked so much that the producer requests them and never get the part? So I was feeling sort of stuck over the years, and then I discovered this thing called storytelling. I took a class, there's a podcast called Risk, and I took a class with Kevin Allison, who was a part of an old MTV show called The State, which was sketch comedy. And I met him, I took his class, and it was the first time that I realized that I could tell my own story on stage in a performative way and not have to follow anyone else's script or guidelines. And it was so freeing to me, and it was a little bit of what I was trying to do at Cranbrook the whole time, but I just couldn't get the medium right, and it was like I had found it. I became obsessed with going to the Moth. I went all the time. How many of you, is anyone not familiar with the Moth? Are you guys pretty familiar with the Moth, all in all? It's a huge storytelling show. They have slams in 27 cities where people put their name in a bag and they get called, and you tell a 5-minute story about your life. They blow a whistle to let you know that time's up, and there's judging teams. So in this completely ridiculous, arbitrary thing, 3 groups of strangers are holding up like Olympic numbers to judge your personal true life experience. And then when you win nothing. You get absolutely nothing. Except then you go to the Grand Slam with the last 9 winners. And then when you win that one, you still win nothing. You get absolutely nothing. And I was obsessed with it. And I would go all the time. And about 6 years ago, I started hosting with the Moth and traveling with them, and I got to go live in Australia for a month where we launched in Sydney and Melbourne. And when I was telling stories, I was telling a lot of stories about being a goth queer kid in Texas in the 90s, which was as much fun as it sounds. And I wanted to put together a solo show, and my friend, who was a clown, like a professional clown and also a clown, he was like, let me direct your show, let's make a show. So for a month, we were trying to put together this very deep, thoughtful, layered, and nuanced show about my experience waiting tables right near Ground Zero for a week after 9/11. And it felt horrible. It didn't feel like making anything that was natural to me. So at one point, he was like, why aren't we just making a show about you being a queer goth kid in Texas in the 90s? And I was like, yes. And in a week, it all just came to fruition. And I performed the show. I performed it on and off for about 1.5 years. And then randomly, a New York Times theater critic came. I don't know why they came to the little theater with the shows about the man who's the atomic bomb, but they did that night. And they made it a New York Times critic's pick, which literally, like 2 days later when it happened, the theater called me, and I was like, you're being mean. Don't do this to me. And they're like, no, just get the New York Times. And that sort of changed the trajectory of a lot of things that I would do. If you ever do a solo piece that gets in the New York Times, literary agents just call you. They don't even act like they know who you are or care about your art. They're just like, you want to write a book? It's very like mafioso. It's weird. And I met a guy that really liked the show. He'd actually came and seen it, and he said, well, do you want to write a memoir? And I said, well, sure. How hard can it be? I already have a script for my 75-minute show. It's very hard. That would be like a 12-page book. So after about 1 year, I wrote that book, and since then, I've basically been teaching storytelling for the page and the stage, and hosting the Moth, and performing different solo works. So what I thought I wanted to do tonight is just basically come and talk a little bit about my background in relation to Cranbrook, and then I'm going to tell you a few stories, and then afterwards we can talk. Does that sound good? Great. Thank you for coming. I just want to address that the world has been a legitimate shitstorm for 2 days, so I appreciate you being here with me right now. I was working on what I was going to say today, and I was like, I can't not talk about what is happening. So I just want to say that it's awful that it's happening, and I hope that we can all laugh and enjoy each other's company tonight and not think about the dark times ahead. Okay. Fantastic. So what do I want to tell you? Oh, I know what I want to do. So, yeah, okay, so like I said earlier, my husband and I are both actors. We met as actors in 2004. We've been together that long. And I tell people when they ask me, they know that I'm an artist, they say, well, what does your partner do? And you might have this now, some of you who are coupled, where you're an artist and you tell someone, oh, well, my partner's also an artist. And the person goes, oh. And there's a little lilt in the voice, like they wanted you to say facial reconstruction surgeon or something, right? They wanted you to give them the answer that was like, oh, go make your art, you know, be free, right? And I think some people think, oh, that must be such a burden for both of you to work in a freelance field as creative people. And I've always liked it. I don't want it any other way. I like having a boyfriend who I could share a home with, and we could go over sides together. I could tell him stories in preparation for the Moth. We could read ridiculous Law & Order SVU scripts, and then we could have lunch or do other things. It was convenient, and I liked it, and I wanted to be with someone else that was creative, even if it didn't mean that we had a lot of security. Now, like I said, when we met, we were both actors, and one thing that I hated going on was print auditions. So when you're an actor and you go on a print audition, you know, it's just for a magazine, for an advertisement. And my boyfriend, Jack, is 6.5 feet tall. He's got salt and pepper hair. He looks kind of like peak era Rock Hudson mixed with George Clooney. I tell people that, and they're like, really? And I'm like, I know. It was like I won the lotto. It was like something. I got no action at Cranbrook, by the way, 2 years, not one. So I think it was karma. I feel like it was karma being like, wow, it's been a dry county. Rock Hudson. He would go on these print auditions, and he was a natural. Like, if anyone turns on a camera, he's great. Every picture of me with his family, it looks like a bunch of really, like, together fit people who own a boat took, like, a mentally handicapped drug addict, like, out for the weekend. Like, that's what, I'm always on one end of them, like it's just the worst, right? And I don't pose well for photos. There's gizmo eyes. It's a mess. So, but when my husband would go on these print auditions, he would always do great, and he loved doing print auditions easy. Now, when I would go on print auditions, any sort of commercial audition, it's the same thing. You go into a studio, there's kind of like a grown man dressed like a 16-year-old skater with like a sideways hat, and he's got a Nikon, and he's like, all right, I just need you, and it's the same thing every time. I just need you to look in the camera, I'm just gonna take a photo. And the first one I always did okay. It was like, great. He's like, all right, and now just give me a slight smile, no teeth. And this is when it started to rev up, everything wrong with me. It was kind of, like it was not, it was like Mona Lisa on acid. And then the last part was, okay, now full smile, teeth. And that was when everything, it was like the inside of my body was being operated by like little minions, and they all like sent the wrong signals to each other, and I just kind of like grimaced. Like, I looked like one of those Easter Island heads. Do you know what I'm talking about? Just like a stone, angry face. And it was always so humiliating because then I'd leave the studio and I could see my own glaring, like grimacing, joyless face, like smiling back. And I'm like, that face is gonna sell 0 products. Like, I'm not gonna get this part. Now, over the years, it's a good thing because my husband started doing more and more commercial work. I discovered storytelling, and I started writing and teaching, and I moved away from sort of traditional acting. And it's probably about 1.5 years ago, we live in LA now, he's like, Davey, do you want to go on this audition with me, this commercial audition? I was like, no, why? And he's like, well, they need like real gay couples, and you know, we're just gonna go stand and like, you know, talk to them. And I was like, I don't really know. Like, I mean, what do I have to do? And he's like, nothing. It's just, you know, like we're real people. So we're just gonna like meet them. And I'm like, so I just kind of like get to be like charming and make jokes and stuff. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I'll go. So we go. We go to the audition. Now, one of the first signs that this was all wrong was when we opened the door and there was literally like a mountain of boys between the age of like 6 and 8, like fighting and screaming and punching each other. There were like 30 of them in the middle of this space, and we kind of walked past them, and I was like, okay, this is really, really strange. I guess they're casting a kids thing across the hall. So I sat down, and I tried to like compose myself. And don't get me wrong, I love kids. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. But something about boys from the age of 5 to 7, I just wish we could send them to an island to like punch each other and pick their noses and talk about how gross girls are until they come back. It's just a lot of energy and a lot of smells. Now, when my boyfriend Jack goes to look at the wall next to the door to sign in, I see him looking at the wall, like, information, whatever, and he's there a long time, and his face kind of shifts. Like, it goes from pleasant to like, ooh. And finally he says, babe, I think you should come over here. And I go over to the wall, and it is like a 40-panel storyboard for the thing that we are auditioning for a bank. Here's the storyboard. It's two gay men, and they go to an orphanage in Syria. They meet several children until they meet one boy, and it's magical, and they get along, and they give him a gift toy. And then they go to the airport, and the boy's very nervous, but they get him ice cream, so then they get on the plane with him. And then the three of them are on the airplane, and the boy's in the middle. The two men are talking over the boy, trying not to be tearful. One of them is very worried. One of them presents him with the toy horse that he thought he left behind in Syria. The boy seems happy, but still seems nervous. Then they get to their beautiful house in Vermont. Cut to a cab, pulls in front of the driveway. The three of them get out of the house. They open the foyer. There's a fire raging. It's a beautiful house. They tell the kid, go upstairs, your room is there. They hold hands. They watch the boy run up the stairs. Dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. They get to the bedroom door at the top of the stairs. They open the door. The boy sees like a giant version of the horse toy, like a stuffed horse, and he like shrieks and is so excited and hugs it. And then the two gay men, dialogue, dialogue, hold hands, look at each other, cry a single tear, fade to black. This is the audition. This is all the things that I will be doing. There's a script that's 5 pages of stuff I have to say. And I look at him and I'm like, why would you bring me? I don't want to. And as they say that, this guy comes forward with a clipboard and says, Jack, David, and Rainbow. Now, Rainbow is a gorgeous 5-year-old boy. He has dark, dark skin, hazel caramel eyes, big chunky curls, and he busts through the other children with his own rolled up headshot, parting them like a sword, like this, right? He's screaming. He's in a little corduroy jacket with elbow patches. He's in tight little high water slacks and loafers. He looks like a tiny little like hipster accountant. He runs past us into the room and he's like, do you know what I can see? I can bounce off the walls. Do you want to do it? I can do a somersault. I had a somersault yesterday. Do you want me to see me do it? I can do it. Do you want to watch it do it? And I'm just like, oh my God, what is happening? And Rainbow won't shut up. And finally, the guy in the hat, same guy from all the auditions, grown man dressed like a 16-year-old Justin Bieber, sideways hat at the camera. He's like, Rainbow. And Rainbow is like Hollywood trained. Rainbow's like, da-da-da. Like, literally, like, lands like a gymnast between me and Jack, right, in front of the camera. And we're standing there, and the guy shooting the spot says, okay, Jack and David, can you just, like, place your hands on Rainbow? You know, like let's have Rainbow be your son. You know, you just adopted. So, we're kind of looking at him. I'm like, okay, I can do this. And Rainbow is, like, acting. He's like a little Daniel Day-Lewis. He's doing great. And once we're sort of situated and we kind of share a few words, the director of the spot goes, hey, so this is just casual. Let's have a conversation. How do you feel about children? And I'm like, this is my chance to shine. And I say, well, Jack and I come from very disparate families. I'm the only child of a single mother, and my boyfriend is one of 5. And as I'm talking, the director says, I'm so sorry, stop. I just need to know, whether or not you want kids. And like our hands are on Rainbow, and I look at Jack, and Jack looks at me, and he goes, yes, like real certain. And then I look at him, and I also want to say yes. And the first few years we were together, we actually had lots of talks about having kids, and there's lots of kids in his family, and we love being around kids. But it was sort of the first moment that I had to actively think about the fact that we just don't talk about that anymore. It kind of went off the radar because we just don't live the kind of lifestyles where that is really an option at that point, and we're always asked by our straight friends all the time, why don't you guys have kids? And I want to be like, do you have $40,000? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't work that way. We're not going to go away for a fantastic Las Vegas vacation and come back with a bun in the oven unless one of us has a really weird physiology. And in that moment, I was like, I don't know what to say right now because I don't know what that question means. And as I'm thinking about it, I noticed that Rainbow's standing between us, and I see his little like blonde curls bopping back and forth. He's looking at us like this. And I realize that this little boy is just putting together the fact that he is between two people playing as parents, neither of whom have a vagina. And he is trying to figure it out. I've seen it before. I know what it looks like. And he's looking at us, and we look at him, and we're like, Rainbow? And then he looks, and he says, who is the lady? Which one's the lady? who of you are the lady? And he's asking, and I freeze. My husband starts kind of just like barfing words. I swear he used the term gender binary at one point to this child. We're just kind of like hiccuping. And then the guy filming the spot, he literally, I hear him, you know that exhale church laugh when someone's just snorting air like a bull because they can't laugh? And then I see his face setting like a sun behind the camera. He's actually using it to like not, so we can't see his laughing face. And I'm looking at Rainbow, and I don't know what to do, and then Rainbow just stops, and he looks me in the eyes, and he says, "You're the lady. You're the lady." And he's so pleased with himself, and the guy is still laughing, and my husband is talking about, well, love doesn't, maybe gender is, and it's just not, it feels like it goes on forever. It probably lasted like 10 seconds, until finally, like, the director composed himself, and he popped back up, and he was like, "Rainbow," And he's like, "Can you guys run the scene?" And I was like, "Okay." So we ran the scene, and we did all the stuff in the room, and we acted like we got to the house, and we walked in the door, and we looked at each other, and a single tear. And it was all so lovely. It was like so nice. And the director yelled, "Cut," and Rainbow looked at us so sweetly, and it was just so warm in the room. And then Rainbow said, "I can also do a backwards somersault," and started bouncing off the walls, just bashing into the walls, bashing. And I looked at Jack, and I was like, "We're leaving right now." And he's like, "Yeah," and he took my hand, and we left the place. We drove home in our car that night, and we laughed about this story for days and days, and we told other people the story for days and days. And I don't know, where we're going to be in X amount of time. I don't know how much money we'll have, how much disposable income to spend on bringing this child into our lives. But I do know that I'm never, ever going to a commercial audition with my husband again. Thank you. So, what time is it? I don't have my phone. 6:15. Okay, great. So basically, just to close, in the last year, it's funny because last time I was here was a year ago, and I was talking so much about developing these new, very sort of traditional narrative linear pieces. And since then, because of some work I've done with a few trauma survivors, because of the sort of political landscape of where we're at, and some of the stuff I just told you about, I've actually sort of changed course. Have you all heard of The Groundlings? It's sort of a character-based sketch company in Los Angeles. I've been doing a lot of work there. So it's funny because I presented a workshop of this new piece I'm doing that's half storytelling but half character work, because I found that it's kind of easier to make sense of some of that stuff by playing someone completely fictionalized. And it's so weird to have discovered that now, because I've dug up that piece, 20 Men Doing It, and I'm like, oh God, I've been trying to do this for 20-something years. And that piece is called Patty Crabb is David Crabb. And Patty Crabb is an old Southern woman with some very conservative ideas and deeply pendulous breasts, who makes people shortcakes gazoon hide, or bless your heart, as she would say. So that's kind of the work that I'm moving towards now. And it was really fun today because I got to go and do a few studio visits, and there's some of you are working with character, and it was really fun to see. And some of you are also working with way more traditionally linear narratives than I remember when I was here. I was kind of like the odd man out. Anyway, that's all I have in terms of presenting and talking, but I wanted to open the floor and do a few questions at the end if anyone had anything to add or ask. Yeah. Every story I've ever told comes from like a positive experience telling my friend an anecdote. I've never had something that is like a completely private thing in my life that then I share on stage for the first time. And I think most people that actually come to study storytelling with me show up because like everyone tells me I'm a great storyteller, which is true half the time. And I think that the real craft of storytelling comes from realizing, oh, these narratives work, people understand this, they laugh, they cry, they feel, but then you have to do the work that you never do in real life, which is the beginning and the end of the story, right? Which is like defining yourself in relation to the world or your audience. Those are my favorite parts of storytelling because those are the things you get to do for the first time on stage. Unless you have really weird friends, you never have to tell them about a bad experience by saying, I grew up, right? And then when you're done telling them that story, unless you have really weird friends, they don't ask you, how did that change you? So that's the kind of work that happens on stage the first time, kind of unpacking what it means, but the story just kind of happens into itself. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Who paid you? Like, thank you. That's very, very sweet. I love that you said they're like movies, because that's my favorite. I always, when I teach storytelling, I always tell people that they have to find scenes versus summaries, because there's so much value. And someone saying like, oh, there's this great story that someone tells about how they had a parent that was really, really awful. And in an early version of the story, he was just like, my mom, she was horrible. I really didn't like my mom. And everyone was like, I don't buy it. Like, everyone's sure your mom's bad. And then he was like, well, one summer I worked in her flower shop, and I wanted to save money because I was going to buy this model car. And at the end of the summer, she gave me a box as a present, and it was about the weight of the car. But when I opened it, it was the pieces of everything I shattered working in her flower shop that summer. Right? So when we talk about scenes and like filmic, like that's like the value in that, really. So you saying that makes me very happy. Thank you. Yeah.
How do you sort of work out whether the story works, or like how to move certain parts around within the story? Is it just sort of telling it to your friends and they're like, no, this doesn't work here?
Kind of telling, I mean, if it's just a basic structure question, yeah, just telling it again and again, and you start to figure it out. Lately, I've been really interested in, and this kind of connects to what I was saying about using characters, a mix of character and fiction, is that I'm really sort of fascinated in what makes a story and what makes comedy. And if any of you have seen Nanette, you should all see Nanette, like see Nanette yesterday on Netflix. That's kind of the way that I'm thinking about editing. If that question for me now has a lot more to do with drama or comedy. I'm really interested in how do you tell. I mean, I've always been interested in like salty sweet, as my director calls it, hug 'em and hit 'em, which is that like, oh my God, him and that dog don't get along. He loves that dog, you know what I mean? Like, I love that, because to me that feels like life. So those are my editing questions that I'm kind of playing with lately, which is like, how do I want the audience to feel about this thing? Like, what's the tone and color of it? One of my least favorite things in the whole world, this is the thing that happens in storytelling a lot, because we talk about telling the story from the place it happened, which can be so hard because you're being asked to rewind to a way you felt well before the way a thing turned out. And it's always so disappointing when you go and see a storyteller and someone walks up and is like, when I met Ben in 5th grade, I knew that we would be friends for a long time. And you're like, Ben's dead. You know immediately. Like, Ben is dead. How is Ben going to die? He's so sad about Ben. So like that's another thing that and that's another thing that with retelling you get out of. You learn that you can revisit a space and perform it a bit differently. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
How has teaching storytelling changed your story?
It has made me realize that I've oftentimes given advice that I've given a lot of advice to people that I know in my heart, artistically and creatively, that I believe in, that has helped them. But there have been times that I've realized that it forces me to take my own advice, right? Like, a lot of people want to tell stories that are difficult or uncomfortable, and they don't understand the value in telling those things. Well, if this feels weird, why should I do it? And, when you're in a good state, it's very easy to be like, because people will learn from your experience, and da-da-da. And then you find yourself I find myself in that spot, and I have to remember what I told people. So that's kind of interesting in terms of the way it's informed my storytelling. And it also sort of forces me to always think about the rules of storytelling. A lot of people are really attached to the idea. They're convinced that they're lying. Like, that's the main thing. The students I work with now at Occidental are like, I need to know about lying. Like, they're almost afraid they're going to lie uncontrollably, like on their own. And that's not to say, I had a guy once in class that was telling a story about a car accident he was in with his uncle. And his uncle survived in the story. And after like 2 weeks of workshopping, he was like, would the story be better if my uncle died? And I'm like, no, don't kill your uncle in your true story. Why would you do that, right? But I think that there's that gravitational need, like you want that big dramatic thing. So for me, a big part of truth has been sort of in teaching people about truth. It sort of forced me to call into question, like, what are the little lies I tell around narrative? I think we all do this, but like collapsing time, protecting people by changing their names, changing people's identities. So that has been really, I think about truth of stories and how accurate my recall is a lot more, I think, than I would if I didn't teach. Yeah. Yeah, that was hard because I really did tell the agent, I was like, yeah, I mean, I already have a script, it'll be done in a month, you know, and he was like, you've never written a book. If I do, I mean, my solo show is not like my storytelling in that it's like a full sort of, if any of you are familiar with John Leguizamo, it's not like I do a line of dialogue as my mother and then just keep walking. It would be a thing where like I would get you to a point in the story and move into a space and the lighting would shift and my mother would have like 2 minutes to tell me about, I found something under your bed, sweetie. You know, so translating that, especially the humor of it, to the page was so hard because I was like, oh, I can't just, like, you can't just pull a mini-me out of the book and drop it and say, like, dance, monkey, you know? So that, it's different, and I'd be lying if I said that I feel the more I write, the more I feel compelled to drama. And the more I tell, the more I feel compelled to, like, dark comedy or laughter. So that is just something that's been interesting and it's divergent. It's much harder for me to communicate humor on the page and much easier for me to communicate drama. So, yeah. Did someone up there have their hand up or no? Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite failure?
Favorite failure?
Yeah. What's the most like spectacular failure you've had that you love?
Oh God, and it's so weird because I feel like I tell enough stories about failures that I should know. I fail. I'm so bad at so many things. You know, it's funny. There's so many stories that are about like wild and oh, I have a lot of great failing at sex stories. I was not good. There's that. God. I don't know. It seems like if I was to read this on paper, I would be like, I know exactly what it is. And I'm like, oh gosh. They're so, oh, I tried to catch a mugger. That's what it is. Sorry. I was mugged at gunpoint a week after 9/11 in Brooklyn because why not? And I was really drunk, and I had been working at a restaurant to save up a lot of money because I was going to get out of New York like so many people were, especially for those next few weeks. And I was walking home in Bushwick, and this guy came out of the dark, and he had a gun. I didn't see it, but he put a gun in my back, and he was like, give me all your money. And I was so drunk and so enraged. I've been waiting tables for 7 days, so I hadn't really been like connecting with friends or crying or watching the news, that I just was like, I need this money, because it was my U-Haul money. It was how I was leaving. And I decided with a gun in my back, very drunk, first, that I would just not give him the money, that I would actively move it from my satchel to my pocket while he nervously looked around, hoping that someone would come out of the building across the street. And then when he finally pushed me and said, because someone came out of the building, a bunch of ravers who were having a rave a week after 9/11, I don't know, he pushed me to go inside the building, and it triggered me so bad that I chased him with a gun through the streets, screaming, and with a woman in my phone on 911 screaming, sir, please stop chasing him. And I was dressed in waiter gear, and I had a magnum of wine, and I just remember screaming. And she asked me what he looked like on the phone, and he was in this green and red striped sweater and these gray slacks, and he had a little fedora on, and I was running, screaming Freddy Krueger, screaming at the top of my lungs in like post 9/11, Freddy Krueger, like screaming. It might not be it was a failure because I didn't catch him, but it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I still think that that's the stupidest thing that I've ever done. Yeah. I didn't catch him. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Why did you decide to start teaching storytelling versus just continuing to tell your story?
Well, I've always been, if there's a thing that I really credit Cranbrook with versus a lot of other educational experiences I've had, it is that it creates workshop experiences. Like I felt like my education here had as much or sometimes more to do with what my peers thought of my output than my teacher. So when I decided to take a storytelling class, luckily, the teacher that I had was of a very similar mind, and everything was very, very workshoppy. So yeah, that's just always been a big tenet of the way that I want to teach. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah, and I would say that really comes from here. I mean, there were times in crits here where you were rolling your eyes, being like, oh, can we please stop? But like, think about those times and being given that free range to do that. So that's a big part of the way that I teach now too, is I never give notes, and then I always ask people what they think, and then we build on that. Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you. Oh, yeah. Carla Diana. Okay, so Carla Diana, she runs 40 here, and were we the same class?
We were.
Okay, so I have a lot of stupid dad jokes I do, and my stupid dad joke for Carla Diana was always when I saw her singing, Carla Diana, oh, Dirty Diana. And while most people would say, leave me alone, David, the thing about Carla is she literally, when we communicate, she's like, I can't wait to hear you do that. So thank you. It makes me so, I did it, we hugged, and I was like, Carla Diana, and she was like, oh. So stupid. What's up?
Well, I had a very teacherly question in a way.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you analyze stories in structures and go back to like Joseph Campbell, Power of Myth, hero, villain.
Yeah, the hero's journey is, I mean, my students now, like, they all have to be familiar with that. I mean, the main thing I stick to is a really classic 5-beat structure that you see over and over and over again. Any fiction writing book, any non-script screenplay writing, which is basically that you have an intro or setup, which I like to call the world as it was, which is like a good way to give your audience an example of like where you were. An inciting incident that's like, if you think of it as a marathon, the inciting incident is, and they're off, right? It should be the point of the story where the audience is like, oh, here's what I'm looking out for. I always like to say that each story should be about you desperately wanting something or desperately not wanting something. If you think of it that way, it's like there's this gravitational pull that can be exciting or terrifying. And then you have the third beat, which are raising stakes, which are all the notes where the audience should feel like, oh, I'm getting closer to figuring out what the answer is, right? Running, doing your horrible tough mutter. And then the fourth beat, which is the main event or climax, which is going through the finish line, answering the question, big conclusion, finale, climax. And then lastly, the resolution, which can also be called the world as it is, which is that little bit of unpacking you get to do. And I teach those 5 beats to everyone in storytelling. And there's ways, people, if I'm ever in a class and I say that, there's always someone that's like, rules are meant to be broken. And I'll start being like, well, tell me stories that don't do that. And someone thinks, and no one can think of anything, or they'll name things and I'll shoot them down. And then someone always really proudly is like, Pulp Fiction. Like they're like so happy, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. Because Pulp Fiction is out of order, but it still follows exactly that. The tension of it is structured exactly that way. So yeah, that's what I teach to everyone. No. Yeah.
I was going to ask the question about nonlinear narratives.
Mm-hmm.
Who we study with is an important part of our narrative
Yeah.
experience. And have you attempted a nonlinear narrative, or was that the answer?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of playing with things that are nonlinear. So I don't know if this kind of answers the question. Personally, I don't do nonlinear. I mean, even trying to think of, well, what is the payoff of a nonlinear narrative, right? Because I know what my instinct would be. I would be like, I'm going to do a nonlinear narrative piece. And I don't know how that would work. Maybe there would be video pieces and they would fall in random order. Maybe I could say that I have different beats of a story and I would draw them at random and tell them out of order. But even then, I would start to think of those pieces and I would structure them. Like, it's just in what I wouldn't be able to do that, I don't think. There's, at Occidental, the work I'm doing now, it's initially about storytelling. All the students develop a 5 to 10 minute story. True story, but then after that, we write, the 10 of us, we write a script together. So an ensemble piece, it's a production that's an immersive theater piece that includes all 10 of their stories. So that it begins, it's sort of like a promenade style theater, meaning that they break up and they're doing their little plays in separate rooms, and the audience passes through the rooms. So they do their stories in a loop. And then they inform each other. So for example, one student was telling a story about a friend of his that died, and it was a very loving tribute story. And another girl was telling a story about how she swore that her dorm room was haunted. So we built a space for them that theatrically functioned like a haunted space that moved from her very funny story about a ghost in her room into his very touching story about his friend who's a ghost that then she appeared in. So that kind of plays around with what you're talking about, because those pieces could move independently as audiences, A, B, and C, move through the space. They were seeing the show in a different order, but even then within that, you've always got the little arcs. So I don't know how that would work. I don't know, when I think of, well, what is nonlinear storytelling, I just think, oh, stand-up. I mean, stand-up to me functions kind of like, because if it's not funny, I don't know how it would work. Like, I'd be curious, yeah. But if you have an idea, let me know. Because that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Do you have stories? I'm thinking of some stories that I tell sometimes, or don't anymore, but stories that you told maybe a while ago that, as you've gotten older or changed, like you sort of realized, like, actually that's a really terrible story, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, I'm not going to tell that one.
Yeah, I told one about 21 minutes ago that, oh, totally. I mean, there are some that I just feel like they're just not good. Like, there's structural problems, the humor doesn't work, bada-bada-da. But then there's a few that I don't feel that way anymore. And that's interesting, especially in this age where everything is archived and podcast, to have those out there. There's one story I wrote about my first kiss, which was a great failure. That was at a spin the bottle party with a bunch of like cool polyamorous bisexual people when I was 16, and I was the one that just acted like I was cool but had never done anything. And I had to, there's always like your group of friends, and then like the friend's mom invites her best friend's kid over, and like it's the kid you all have to bear with, who's like not one of you. She came over, and she was a very awkward, strange girl that had bandages all over her face. She just had some kind of nose surgery, and she had a lot of braces, and she was obsessed with kissing me. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it. And she literally like pointed the bottle at me, and we kissed. And people liked the story, and I could tell it casually because it's very funny. I tell big arc stories, but I love little visceral stories that are about a moment. Like there's one I tell about a bad massage, where it's just elongating all the jokes and tension and cringiness out of a moment. And I did that with her kiss. And I had told that story as part of a big show, and then I'd also written about it in my book, but I did it for a podcast a few years back. And because it wasn't housed in that way, it lost. What that story needs to work is that I was also a vulnerable kid faking my own level of experience, just like her. And in the version I told, it got cut up and released as a podcast, and they did not like me as a human being in the world. And I remember when I heard it, because it takes time to get away from your work, I was like, well, they're just wrong, because people said that this is heartwarming in the book, and people laughed. And it took me like a year to be like, oh, I get what happened. It needed this thing that got cut off for this audience and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that makes me feel, so that one makes me feel bad. But in general, I try to be kind to people, even that I don't like in my stories. My dad wouldn't agree, but I try. Yeah. Anybody else? Bueller? Yeah, great. I do that for I'll do that for like my 21-year-old students, and one of them laughs, and I'm like, oh, kids. Great. Thank you all so much for coming, and I'll see some of you at the workshop tomorrow if you want to come. It is at 2 o'clock. If you want to come, and we'll talk about stories, and a few people will tell stories. We'll dive deeper into structure, and yeah, it'll be awesome. Thanks, everyone.